Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Greg never predicted a wedding would fracture his own marriage. On a bright Saturday, he and Alicia entered a banquet room draped in white and gold flowers. Sophie prepared to marry her longtime partner. Alicia shone in the navy dress Greg always admired. But something shifted in her rhythm that night. Her thrill felt oversized and tense. She laughed fast, drank champagne faster, and surveyed the room like she hunted coordinates. Greg filed it under celebration and shared history. He misread the data. The reception launched without alarms. Greg greeted acquaintances, talked to Jason, and watched Alicia dance with Sophie on a temporary dance floor. The music blared. Energy spread. The room felt seamless. Greg stepped to the bar for another drink. Alicia vanished from the dance space. No dress in sight. He assumed she answered a quieter call. Bathroom, garden, a short break in the signal. 10 minutes rolled. Then 20. Still no trace. Greg paced corridors, checked the outdoor garden, asked smokers, sent someone to confirm the restroom. Zero results. Alicia dropped from visual radar. He returned to his seat, pulse uneasy. A cold weight occupied his chest like a locked vault door. Jason asked if the system failed. Greg said yes. He watched every corner like he debugged satellites. At 1 hour plus, Alicia walked back into frame. Greg saw her come in through the side door leading to the parking lot and immediately sensed that something was completely off. Her hair, which had been perfectly styled in an elegant boutonniere, was now partially loose with strands falling across her face. The red lipstick she'd carefully applied before leaving home was smudged. Almost gone. Her navy blue dress had a strange crease at the waist, as if it had been crumpled. Greg's stomach tightened. He stood up from his chair and walked quickly toward her. She didn't even seem to notice him approaching. Where are you?" Greg asked, trying to keep his voice calm, though worry was clear in his tone. Alicia looked at him with an expression Greg had never seen before. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was something worse. Complete inference mixed with irritation. She sighed as if he were a nuisance. As if his legitimate question were an absurd invasion of her privacy. Leave him alone. I'm living my life. You don't control me. The words came out cold and sharp, hitting Greg like a punch to the gut. He stood frozen there in the middle of the reception hall as Alicia simply walked past him and headed straight to the bar to order another drink. The harshness in her voice, the total lack of consideration. It was completely foreign to the relationship they'd always shared. Greg was still trying to process what had just happened when Jason appeared beside him, holding his phone with slightly trembling hands. Man, I need to show you something. His cousin's voice was hesitant, weighed down by something Greg couldn't identify. He took the phone and looked at the screen. The image he saw made fueled around him slow to a crawl. It was a photo taken in the venue's parking lot, partially lit by yellowish streetlights. Alicia was leaning against a dark car, and a man Greg had never seen before was kissing her deeply. His hands were on her waist and her arms were wrapped around his neck. The photo was clear enough to leave no doubt. There was no denying it, no misinterpreting it. It was Alicia, his wife, kissing another man while he'd been frantically listening for her inside the reception hall. Greg handed the phone back to Jason without saying a word. He couldn't speak. He couldn't think straight. Anger started rising like hot lava through his veins, but something stronger held him in place. The awareness that they wearied Sophie's wedding and causing a scene would ruin the celebration for Alicia's friend. So Greg did something that took every ounce of his willpower.
He held himself together. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white, and decided to wait.
But night had changed completely. Every laugh from Alicia, every move she made on the dance floor, every time she chatted animatedly with other guests. It all now seemed like a grotesque farce. She was acting as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just betrayed 7 years of their relationship in atomly lit parking lot. The rest of their reception was silent torture. Greg stayed at the table watching Alicia from a distance. She danced, drank, laughed, took photos with Sophie. Not once did show any sign of guilt or regret. It was as if Greg were invisible, as if their marriage meant nothing. When Jeopardy finally ended and guests began to say their goodbyes, Alicia came up to Greg with a smile on her lips, completely unaware of the silent storm he carried inside. Ready to go? She asked, as if everything were perfectly normal. Greg just nodded and walked toward the car. The drive home was in complete silence. Greg gripped the steering wheel so tightly his fingers ached. Alicia, seemingly oblivious or indifferent of palpable tension in the car, tried to start a conversation. The party was beautiful, wasn't it? Sophie was so happy. I love the flowers and the cake was perfect. Did you see how Greg didn't respond? Not a word. He just kept driving, eyes fixed on the road, jaw clenched tight. Alicia eventually gave up and leaned her head against the window, falling asleep before they even reached home. Greg glanced at her sleeping so peacefully and felt a mix of anger and sadness he'd never experienced before. The next morning, Greg woke before dawn. Alicia was still sleeping deeply, probably because of all the drinking the night before. He went to the living room and grabbed the laptop they shared. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the browser and logged into Alicia's email, whose password he knew because there had never been secrets between them. Or so it believed. Her inbox was full of ordinary messages, newsletters, purchase confirmants, but Greg knew that if something was hidden, it would be in another folder. He clicked on Sent Mail and started scrolling. At first, nothing unusual. Then he saw a name that kept repeating. Brett. Greg clicked on the first message and started reading. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. These weren't just casual messages. They were intimate conversations loaded with sexual innuendo, plans for meets, and clear indications this wasn't the first time. Brett was the bartender at the club where Sophie had held her bachelorette party 2 weeks earlier. Alicia and Brett had met there, exchanged numbers, and had since met up 3 times. 3 times she'd lied about where she was. 3 times she'd betrayed Greg's trust without a shred of remorse. The messages were explicit, detailed, and made it clear Alicia was emotionally invested. She wrote about how Brett made her feel ill again, how her marriage to Greg had become boring and predictable. But what shocked Greg even more was something even crueler. In one of the messages, Alicia described Greg to Brett in a way that made his heart sink. She called him controlling, possessive, even emotionally abusive. All lies. Elaborate lies to justify her betrayal and make Brett believe she was a victim seeking refuge in the arms of a savior. Greg felt sick. Not only had she physically cheated on him, but she was destroying his reputation with ridiculous lies just to win her lover's sympathy. He took screenshots of all the conversations, saved them in a separate folder, and closed the laptop carefully so as not to make a sound. Greg returned to the bedroom and looked at Alicia, still asleep. She looked so peaceful, so innocent under the covers. But now he knew the truth. He knew who she really was behind the mask of the devoted wife. He didn't wake her up right away. First, he went to the study and called a divorce attorney a colleague had recommended months earlier. During a casual conversation about a friend in a similar situation, he scheduled an appointment for Monday morning. Then he returned to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally woke Alicia with a gentle touch in her shoulder. She opened her eyes slowly, still drowsy, and took a few seconds to focus on Greg's face. "What time is it?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. Greg didn't answer the question. Instead, he simply took the laptop and drew out with him and placed it open on her lap, showing the exact conversation between her and Brett. Alicia took a few seconds to process what she was seeing. When she understood, her face went pale instantly. She tried to close the laptop, but Greg held it firmly. "No, you're going to look. You're going to face what you did," Alicia started stammering, grasping for words that could justify the unjustifiable. Greg. This isn't, I can explain, but he cut her off with an icy calm that even startled him. "Explain what exactly? Explain how you spent the last few weeks getting involved with a bartender while I worked to pay our bills. Explain how you lied 3 times about where you were. Or maybe you'd like to explain how you called me abusive to your lover." Each word came out like a sharpened blade. Alicia tried to deny it, downplay it, deflect. "It wasn't anything serious, Greg. It was just physical attraction. It doesn't mean anything." I still love AO. I swear. Greg let out a dry, humorless laugh. Physical attraction, of course. That's why you two talked every day, planned future meets, and you made up elaborate lies about me to justify it all. He picked up his phone and showed her the screenshots he'd taken. I've got it all right here, Alicia. Every message, every lie. Every time you cheated on me over these past weeks while I worked to pay our bills. Alicia tried a different approach this time, lashing out. You invaded my privacy. You had no right to read my messages. Greg looked at her with a mix of pity and disgust. Privacy. You lost that right the moment you decided to betray our marriage. And y'all know what's even more interesting. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Panic flooded Alicia's face. You did what? Greg continued relentless. And there's more. I also figured out who Brett is. Did a quick search on his social media. Charming bartender, 28 years old, known for dating married women. You're not special, Alicia. You're just another name on his list. And those lies you told about me. I'll sue him for defamation if I find I've been spreading that to other people. Alicia started crying, but Greg felt no sympathy. These were tears of desperation at being caught, not genuine remorse, he went on. And there's one more thing. I'm going to show these messages to my friends and to yours too. Alicia turned white. You can't do that. Her voice came out as a desperate whisper. Greg nodded. I can and I will. Your mom's going to be horrified. Your dad's going to know exactly who you've become. The lies you told about me. They're going to be ashamed, Alicia. Ashamed of what you've done. Alicia's tears intensified, but Greg remained unmoved. I want a divorce. I'm filing the papers on Monday. You can pack your things and leave the house today. Or you can stay in the guest room until we sort everything out officially. Your choice. Alicia tried to argue, to beg, to promise she'd change, that she'd end things with Brett, that they'd go to Coop's therapy, anything. But Greg had already made up his mind. There's no therapy that can fix deliberate lies and repeated betrayal. Alicia, you didn't make a mistake. You made consciences again and again over these past weeks. And at your best friend's wedding, you had the nerve to answer me with contempt when I asked where you were. It's over. He got up from the bidet and left the room, leaving Alicia alone, crying. Greg went to the kitchen, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and for the first time in many hours, felt a strange sense of relief. The truth had been exposed. No more masks. No more lies. In the weeks that followed, the divorce process began. Greg kept his word and showed the evidence to both families. Alicia's parents reacted exactly as he'd predicted. Shock, disappointment, and shame. Her mother cried when she read messages, especially the parts where Alicia lied about Greg being abusive. Her father, a man of few words, simply told Greg he had the family's full support and that Alicia needed to foresee the consequences of her choices. With their own family's backing and with irrefutable proof of the messages, she had little bargaining power. Greg's attorney was relentless, using every message and documented lie to build a solid case. Alicia eventually accepted a settlement that gave her far less than she'd hoped for. The house stayed with Greg along with most of their assets. She left with some clothes, a few pieces of furniture, and a ruined reputation. News of the affair spread quickly throughout their social circle. Jason, still shaken by what he'd witnessed at the wedding, ended up mentioning the photo to a few close acquaintances. Alicia tried playing the victim on social media, posting vague messages about rushed judgments and untold sides of the story, but her strategy fell apart when one of Greg's friends, tired of the half-truths, publicly shared a summary of the facts, including the lies about abuse. The post spread like wildfire, supportive comments poured in for Greg on social media while Alicia was confronted by multiple people demanding explanations. She eventually deleted all her accounts and disappeared from the group's social life. As for Brett, he faced consequences, too. When the wife of a regular at the club where he worked found out about the affair and the lies he'd helped spread, she made sure the word got around. The club's manager, worried about the venue's reputation, fired Brett 12 weeks later. He tried to sue for wrongful termination, but without concrete evidence and with his own reputation tarnished, the case never moved forward. Brett vanished from social media and, according to rumors, moved to another city. 8 months had passed since that fateful night at Sophie's wedding. Greg was unrecognizable. He'd moved into a modern downtown apartment, one he'd chosen and decorated on his own for the first time in years. Work, once just an obligation, had become a healthy outlet. He'd earned a promotion after leading an important project, and with his higher salary, started taking weekend trips to places she'd always wanted to visit, but never suggested while married. On one of those trips during a weekend in a coastal town, he met Renee, an independent photographer with a genuine smile and a worldview that captivated him from the very first moment. They started talking regularly, and while Greg wasn't ready to fully commit yet, he felt hope again. Alicia, on the other hand, hadn't been so lucky. She'd treated back together with Brett a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. But he publicly rejected her in a cold message that made it clear she'd only ever been a temporary distraction. Without Greg's financial support and with her reputation in ruins, Alicia was let go from the job she'd held for 3 years. The company cited cost-cutting, but Greg heard from one of her former colleagues that the real reason was Alicia's frequent absences. She'd been spending afternoons in bars, trying to forget the mess she'd made of her life. With no options left, she moved back in with her parents, who took her in with a mix of compassion and disappointment. She found a job at a department store, earning less than half what she used to, and spent her days in a monotonous routine that only reinforced everything she'd lost. It was on an ordinary Tuesday morning that Greg and Alicia ran into each other by chance. Greg was at a supermarket near his office buying ingredients for the dinner planned to make that night. He was distracted comparing pasta prices when heard a familiar voice call his name. He turned and saw Alicia standing a few feet away holding a shopping basket with only a few items inside. She looked visibly different. Her once well-groomed hair was dull and pulled into a messy ponytail. Her clothes were simple, lacking the style she used to have. But what struck Greg most were her eyes. They looked tired, dim, missing the spark he remembered from their early years together. "Greg," she said again, taking a hesitant step toward him. "How are you?" Her voice carried a mix of nervousness and hope, as if this brief, casual conversation might somehow fix what was beyond repair. Greg looked at her for a long moment, processing the situation. There was no anger in his chest, no burning resentment, just a calm indifference, almost liberating. "I'm doing well, Alicia," he replied in a polite but distant tone, as if speaking to a distant acquaintance, not someone he'd shared 7 years of his life with. She tried to keep the conversation going, asked about his job, his family. But each of Greg's answers was short, factual, and closed off to intimacy. Alicia realized there was no room for a connection. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and she forced a sad smile. "I just wanted you to talk. No, I'm really sorry for everything." Greg nodded, not in acceptance of the apology but simply to acknowledge she'd spoken. "I know," was all he said. After an awkward, brief silence, he placed the pasta he'd chosen into his cart and looked at her one last time. "Take care, Alicia," and then he simply turned and walked toward the checkout without looking back. Without hesitation, Alicia stood there alone among the supermarket aisles, watching Greg walk away. She'd lost everything. The husband who loved her, the comfortable life they'd built, the respect of family and friends, all because she believed the grass was greener on the other side. That the temporary thrill of an affair was worth more than years of partnership and trust. She finally understood far too late that some choices destroy not just relationships, they destroy entire versions of ourselves. And while Greg moved forward, renewed and free, Alicia remained trapped in the consequences of her own decisions, carrying the weight of regrets that could never be undone. Greg left the supermarket with a strange but comforting feeling. He'd looked into the eyes of the person who betrayed him and felt absolutely nothing but peace. The wound had healed. Life had exacted the price of betrayal. And he'd learned that not all stories end with reconciliation or forgiveness. Some just end. And sometimes the real happy ending isn't about reclaiming what was lost, but realizing you never needed it to be whole. As he drove back to his apartment, Greg turned on the radio and allowed himself to smile. The future fourth first time in a long while felt promising again. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.